Welcome to the Biotech Startups podcast by Exceeder. Join us as we speak with first-time founders, serial entrepreneurs, and experienced investors about the challenges and triumphs of running a biotech startup, from pre-seed to IPO, with your host, John Chi.
My guest today is Bogdan Knezevic, co-founder and CEO at Kaleidoscope, the R&D operations platform for data-driven decisions and work planning. Kaleidoscope was built to give R&D a platform for easily understanding their data, tracking projects and decisions, and communicating key progress. By leveraging decades of experience spanning bio, engineering, and design, Kaleidoscope created a powerful framework that brings the best of modern product principles into the hands of innovators who need them the most. Bogdan holds a PhD in genomics and drug discovery from the University of Oxford and was selected as a Rhodes Scholar. Prior to his PhD experience, he attended the University of Calgary, where he graduated with a bachelor's in neuroscience and first authored multiple publications focusing on genetic and epigenetic factors in disease mechanisms. In addition to academia, Bogdan was also an internationally ranked competitive swimmer for many years. With deep expertise in neuroscience, big data, genomics, and R&D infrastructure, Bogdan brings a multidisciplinary perspective that listeners won't want to miss. Over the next 4 episodes, Bogdan shares how his experiences with wet lab research, data analytics, and software shaped his approach to building tools for R&D. Throughout the series, he reflects on the challenges of scaling biotech infrastructure, the risks of operational inefficiencies, and what it really takes to support scientists. He also discusses co-founding Kaleidoscope and finding ways to drive lasting impact in the industry. Today, we're diving into Bogdan's upbringing in Serbia and Canada and the formative experiences that shaped his mindset as a founder. He shares what it was like to immigrate during the Yugoslav wars, how his parents rebuilt their lives from scratch, and why their resilience continues to influence his sense of responsibility and grit. We'll also explore how swimming at an elite level taught him discipline, how his early interest in science took shape in Canada's public school system, and why his family's sacrifices instilled a lifelong drive to make his work meaningful. Without further ado, let's dive into this episode of the Biotech Startups podcast. Bogdan, good to see you. Thanks for coming on the podcast.
Thanks for having me, John.
So I've really been looking forward to this. I know we've been having extensive conversations kind of since we actually put this on the calendar. But I'm glad we officially get to hit record right now. And in traditional opening fashion of the Biotech Startups podcast, we always like to turn back the hands of time to really learn about what your upbringing was like and how it influenced your business philosophy, leadership style, and really just learn like how you got involved in science and business. So take us back. What was it like growing up?
Cool. Yeah. It's a pretty rare treat now to be able to talk about those days. So especially in like a podcast format.
Yeah.
So I like the kind of long form nature here that lets us do that. Yeah, so I was actually born in Serbia in the early 90s. This is right around when the kind of it was called Yugoslavia back then. So the civil war was just starting, which I think really did kick off a series of dominoes falling that led to where I am today. So I don't have a lot of like personal memories. I've been back many times since, but of the first few years there. But the thing that really stuck with me and had like a pretty profound impact, I think, was just, which is going to sound like very typical or cliche to any immigrants, but it is that kind of immigrant story of a family, my parents both being like very well educated and having like social circles that they had comfort with at home, and deciding to kind of rip all that out and move, and not just move, but I think like move at a time, first of all, when there wasn't like digital communication, move to a country where my mom spoke some of the language, my dad spoke little to none, and also move, leaving behind all their social circles, and also move and have to give up their profession. So they were both psychologists by training, which unfortunately meant that, the way that the kind of system works in Canada for that profession is like not something that you could just start doing if you were educated somewhere else. There's like a whole process by which to do that, which is also very limiting when you don't have the language skills. So there was a lot there for them to have to just uproot and do with very little like resources. Like uh, personally and even like after we moved within a year, we had sponsored like two of my grandparents and my uncle to move as well. So we were living in Canada, six of us on basically two new immigrant salaries. And at the time, like my mom was working on her like PhD thesis, so she wanted to continue like research. So she was figuring that out and working like for one of our telecom companies and like customer service, like answering customer service calls. My dad was just working on anything he could as he was learning English. So that meant like bakeries and hotels and like literally anything that he could find an ad for. Um, and so to me, like just everything that had to do with that and like the courage to do that and the perseverance to just be okay with that, to have like low ego and not think like, I'm above this, like I'm never gonna do this because I'm so well educated. Like, doesn't matter. Like, you have to do what you have to do to get to where you want to be and work under the constraints you have, and that means swallowing your ego and just realizing like that's just the reality of it, and you have to grind away if you're gonna hit that success. So I think like that to me is definitely a big um portion of my upbringing that stuck with me, and just seeing that you have to put in a tremendous amount of work. And then having like snapshots of my life since then, and I won't, jump too far into the future because I know we'll eventually get there, but just seeing that um, we went from that being our reality to my parents now, like being able to retire and having paid off like their house and having like a couple of other properties that they own, and it's just like such a crazy different stark contrast to where we were then. So like just the kind of evidence that like, hey, it's possible and you can like 10x or 100x your situation if you like apply yourself and like be resilient to the ups and downs. And that just makes me excited because I think that instilled a lot in me, but also I think now I feel responsible. Like, okay,
Yeah.
I have to just do that much better because like I've
Yeah.
just been like, yes, as a kid growing up, I also had very limited resources, but by the time I was an adult, we had already established ourselves. So like me at this, I'm 33. Me at this age compared to like my parents at 33 is like night and day. And so I feel like duty or like like moral obligation to like make sure I'm putting great things out there and like putting my energy towards things that matter, because like why else? Like I'm basically all of the reason why they chose to make that move. Like I know anyone would leave a war, but like that drastic of a move was almost entirely because they couldn't picture like raising a child in during a war, and then also in like the aftermath of all the crap that any recovering region has to go through for generations. Um, so I feel that kind of like obligation, not because they like placed it on me overtly in
Yeah,
any
yeah,
way,
yeah.
but just like purely intrinsically.
Yeah, and honestly, like that story really resonates with me because my parents are also immigrants, and I think about the immigrant experience, and it is like startup problems pale in comparison.
100%.
Pale in comparison. This is like, you know, it just like is multiples more difficult and like multiples more courageous too, in my opinion. Maybe other people might feel differently, but like especially like not knowing the language, it's just like you're you are like kind of at this point where you're like, I have to like not only do I have to like get up to speed and then catch up, like this whole environment, you talked about like the social circles that you're leaving. There's like a lot, all of that kind of like history, which usually, you know, whenever I think about people who are kind of getting their start, you have this like kind of like safety net or network that you can rely on. But like exactly what you're describing, like what your parents, it took a lot of courage to do that, and then just really does not have that network to like immediately call upon. Um, and I think that is, I'm always impressed by like the kind of these stories, and it makes me like want to like work harder to like I was like, you made all these sacrifices, like I can't let this sacrifice go to waste. Like I really
Yeah.
can't. And again, same thing. It's not like my parents are like, you better do this. It's more of like, no, I just like innately like I feel compelled to do it.
Yeah. Yeah. 100%. And I have started now like asking for concrete stories from my parents because I realize like a lot of this stuff is like half memories of my own, but
Yeah.
I've tried to make it a point to, when we're hanging out, ask them to share stuff. And it's
Yeah.
like the amount of change across so many aspects is always mind-blowing to me. So there's all the stuff we talked about, but also even the fact that so we moved and it was January and this was back when global warming had not had as much of an
Yeah.
effect, but it was
Yeah.
like they described like we came to Canada, we're like at a bus stop and it's like in I still think in Celsius, because I'm Canadian, but it's like minus 27 degrees Celsius. We don't have a car. We're like waiting for a bus. And my parents thinking like, what on earth have we done? Like,
Yeah.
where are we? Like, what is this place? Like for anyone who
Yeah.
knows any kind of North American city with a couple of exceptions like New York, like they're not very walkable. You kind of have to have a car.
Yeah.
And so like just that weather aspect being like unreal to them and or even before they came, so they had like figured out, through different connections, like someone who was gonna meet them and like whatever. And then days before the flight, that person basically was like, "Oh, I can't um do this like I can't do it." And so then they're trying to figure out desperately like what on earth do we do and like trying to, call people to figure out like does anyone have a cousin who has a cousin who has a cousin
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
somewhere? Like all of that is very hard to, wrap my head around. Like you said, it pales. The problems and challenges of like even building a company, which I think is one of the hardest things to do, like existentially just pale in comparison. Um, Another story that they recently shared, which was like wow to me, is when my dad was working at one of those, I think it was at the bakery. But like in one of the first couple of weeks of that, my mom saying that she like got a phone call at like 4 a.m. and it was like your husband like had an accident and she thought like he like lost an arm or like something like it was thankfully it was like his thumb and it wasn't like he had to like lose the thumb or anything like that, but just like it's so hard to picture like getting that within the first whatever few weeks of being in a new country and being overwhelmed by all this, but like not having any other options. um so yeah, that like those kind of things really stick with me.
Absolutely. And like I think when I think about these kinds of stories and experiences in like personal kind of like familial things, it's like something hard comes up during, it's like not to diminish like the entrepreneurial effort, but it's just like what ends up happening, at least for me, is like it just makes the obstacle that I'm facing feel way more like we can get through this. We've seen harder shit before. Like we've seen harder shit, like, and we've figured it out. Um, and I think too is this kind of like that you talked about like that resilience and that grittiness. And I oftentimes think about, just like like running a business or just like anything, any hard initiative. It's just like the kind of resilience and willingness to fight through it is ultimately what is like the dictating factors. Like, are you going to like toss in the towel or are you going to figure it out? And a lot of that just comes down to just like like being able to grit through it. Um, and that's at least when I reflect on my kind of like parents like immigrant journey. And also same thing like I had a similar upbringing where I lived in a multi-generational household. So kind of same scenario. And yeah, it's just like it's in a similar fashion. My parents are like can finally retire, and like I'm like hell yeah, like good for you guys. You guys deserve this. Like you guys proper deserve this. But now they're just like they're so retired that they're just like calling me thinking I'm retired. I'm like not retired. Like I'm not retired. You're retired. Like I can't come hang out with you like on a random Tuesday. I have like these other things I need to be doing. I'm jealous. I enjoy it, but I can't be there. So it's good to see when your parents get to relax a little bit.
Yeah, it's so funny you say that because thankfully my dad he ended up like starting a business around like insurance and tax and stuff. But thankfully he did, and he never scaled it. He could have, but he never scaled it beyond like him and one other person kind of helping him. But thankfully he did that because there are finally now times where like I'm stressed. It's like very hard to explain like how why all these things are like eating away at me. And if I'm like on a phone call with my parents or like texting them or whatever, like first of all, he obviously understands a lot of that. And my mom also understands it because I'll say something and she'll go, yeah, I can only imagine. Like I know how I see the same thing in your dad when I think I was commenting on so I was recently traveling for a couple of weeks. I was commenting on how I'm like very antsy and like not able to relax for the full trip anymore because I'm like I'm not actually switched off. I'm still thinking about work and I'm still like doing work at like stupid times in the day.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um and I was just describing like how the last 5 days of the trip I was it was like getting up there.
Yeah.
And yeah, my mom was like, yeah, I totally get it. I see this exact same thing when I travel with your dad, like and he is a one person company and there's a lot to do obviously, but
Yeah.
like y'all are 10 or more people, which means that like you're responsible to like other people as well, so I only
Yep.
imagine that the stress like
Yep.
compounds.
Yep.
So yeah, it's funny you say that.
Yeah.
Because sometimes it's easy to forget that we're not retired.
Yeah, yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
Like,
yeah.
thanks, Dad. Like, I sometimes I wish I can get to break like you're like right now that you're enjoying. Um,
Yeah.
but so like as you're now in Canada. What was your experience? Getting into the school system. Like, did you when you were going in the school system, did you find a spark for science? Did you find a spark for business? What was your kind of like early schooling like?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think I felt very lucky because the Canadian school system, the public school system is like uh, pretty robust and like consistent in experience regardless of where you are. And so it's a blessing to not have to stress or have your family stress about like, oh, what school is he gonna go in, and just kind of focus on the fundamentals
Yep.
and like the nurture that happens at home and just trust that like I'll become the person I'll become. So I thought like initially just the like learning of the language was hard, and I think I still am, we can get into that, but I was a very like energetic kid. And I didn't have English, and also Serbian and in general like a lot of European culture is very like physical touch oriented, and so there was like a lot of issues early on where like like kindergarten teachers would be like, oh, Bogdan needs to learn how to like use his words and not, pull on someone's shirt when he wants their attention and like stuff like that. And
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
thankfully, like I feel like I had the best of both worlds in that I had like really strict parents, um, but also ones that wanted to like champion me. So it was like strict to me, but outwardly it was like, okay, well, how are we gonna help him get there? And so this is hilarious because I remember like my mom's first response to that, and kind of the natural way things felt is like my mom ended up very involved together with my grandma with like school related stuff, and my dad ended up very involved with like the athletics that I later did. Um, but my mom, I remember that like conversation where she's like, okay, well, are you gonna teach him English? Because he's like ESL, like
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
if you want him to use his words, which I agree, like what are you doing to teach him English? And she realized like they weren't doing anything in kindergarten because like that wasn't a concept back then. So she basically just took it upon herself, was like, okay, I'm just gonna teach him English, and
Wow.
like taught me English within a span of like a month. enough so
Sweet.
that I didn't have to do that. So there's a lot of that, like,
Yeah.
strictness with me, but then also like, okay, well then how do we help you get better, and like what are the real obstacles in front of you that are not like your fault, but you just have to learn how to deal with. So a lot of my upbringing just on the family side was around like, again, this will sound very typical to immigrants. It's like, great, you did great there. Like, how could you have done better? Like, the
Yeah.
only world where there isn't a better is like if it was 100.
Yeah. Yeah.
Otherwise, like, there's always room for improvement. Like,
Yeah.
even if it was like not, 99, 98, like it doesn't
Yeah.
matter. Like, where's the missing
Yeah. Yeah.
couple of percent?
Yeah.
So there was a lot of that, a lot of like work at home around just pushing me to go deeper in the stuff I was learning. My grandparents were both like math professors, so like doing math with them on the side. And then in the school sense, I think um for me it like this kind of interest in the sciences and math very naturally emerged. And was something that I, on the math side, I had a lot of great, pretty, foundational, work with my grandma specifically, where I thought actually that was probably the biggest delta in curriculum between Serbia and Canada is like the quality of math you learn when you're younger. I think in Canada, I don't know what it is now, but I think basically until university, math is like not taught very well, or
Yeah.
wasn't,
Yeah.
compared to like most other countries,
Yeah.
where there is like a high population of like educational institutes or high density. Um, and so thankfully I had that, but then everything else I thought was like pretty great in the public school system, in terms of like my own development in the sciences, in languages, but yeah, being around a lot of other immigrants, that's a thing that I only realized later in life that I completely took for granted. And I think it was very viscerally apparent to me that, especially in the US, a lot of people don't have that experience unless you come from, again, one of a couple of cities where I don't know what the stats are today, but like several years ago, it was like half of people in Toronto were born outside of Canada, which is crazy because then there
Wow.
was also the people who moved and then had kids, and I would say
Yep.
like those kids are probably still very culturally attached to there. So like it's a majority of people there, and that was very much my reality of kind of growing up in the Toronto area, which now I'm like so thankful for because it exposed me to like so many different like people and cultures, and just the like potential of like what you can do when you have a lot of different um backgrounds of individuals together. Um yeah.
So, as you know, it sounds like the math and like science component was like kind of your strong suit as you were, getting to the age where you're starting to consider universities. What was going through your mind at that point? And how did you end up selecting, the university you ended up going to? And I know
Yeah.
you eventually chose to focus on neuroscience, but what was that like?
Yeah. So it's funny because someone recently asked me, if if you didn't study what you studied, what would you have studied? I think knowing what I know now, it probably would have been math, almost definitely. I actually think that like m math as a field, I think it's very different for people now, but back when I was going into university, I think it's one of the most like poorly advertised or PR'd
Yeah,
fields.
yeah,
It was at the time,
yeah.
where it
Maybe
was like,
I
well,
think
what
they
can you do
don't
with
do
math?
any. They don't do any
No,
PR.
no. I think it
Yeah.
was basically like, what could you do with math? It's like you could teach math, you could be like a mathematician, which is to me was like, I guess you're like developing theorems, like I don't know, or you could work in like finance.
Yeah.
And none of those things sounded to me like compelling or
Yeah.
appealing. Obviously now I think they teach stats a lot more, and then stats has implications in a lot of fields. Obviously, now there's a much clearer link between math and everything happening in like ML and CS and like that world. Um, but there wasn't like was very poor PR,
Yeah, yeah,
very poor
absolutely.
branding.
Yeah.
And so in my head, I was like, okay, well, I guess it's not math, and so it'll be something in science. Um, and for neuro, it was partly on a loose guess or loosely educated whim, which was like me sitting on my computer going through the list of things I could major in. I'll get to like how I chose university because it's relevant, but like once I had like going through and looking and kind of like looking into each of the majors that were offered, and then realizing with neuro, that as like a field, it was pretty new, or this concept of like formalizing neuro as a field of study was new. It was, I think, what the second year, that the program existed at the University of Calgary, and I think around then was when universities in North America in general were starting to introduce it. And so that seemed exciting to me because, um, the way that it had been constructed as a major was by bringing together the kind of profs and heads of a bunch of different departments, because the idea was like neuro is very complex. There are aspects of it that are psychology, like understanding like how does this manifest in human behavior. There's aspects of it that are biochemistry, like what's actually happening on like a cellular or molecular level. There's aspects of it that are like systems, like same as like computer science systems and biosystems. There's aspects of it that are definitely like school of medicine related. And so the idea was like, let's bring together a curriculum that doesn't actually have like a single department. It's people from all of these that will then, there's ethics involved, and stuff like that. So that to me was very compelling because I just thought it was like a fascinating way to learn about a field where you're not taking the same kind of cookie cutter courses that like all the other science majors seem to be taking at a time when we were learning so much about the field, like we were back then. In terms of the school itself, um, the biggest factor other than academics at play was athletics. So I had been competitively swimming at a pretty high level at that point, and so that meant that I wanted to go to a school where I could keep doing that. So the first decision point was like, do I go to the US, kind of typical like NCAA scholarship route? Do I stay in Canada? Um, and I think there's, a lot of like polarizing opinions on that. I think my takeaway at the time was, um, the US obviously has like greater volume and density of like athletic, like eliteness. It is also more unforgiving in that because it's such a commercialized thing. And I'm generalizing, this is definitely obviously not the case at, case by case, but you're much more likely to be thought of as like a number and like a replaceable number. And so if you have a bad season or let alone a couple of bad seasons, in the vast majority of cases, chances are you will kind of get left behind because there's like 10 other people that could do the thing. And so when I contrasted that to my experience of Canadian universities, and yes, there was less of them. There was a handful that I could train at that level. Um, but the ones that did have that caliber, took a much more kind of personal approach. And so the first decision was like, okay, let's stay in Canada. Um, and let's go to a school that has not just a program I would like, but also a strong swim team.
Very cool. And I can say like it can be cutthroat in kind of like the athletic programs. I like, I grew up playing lacrosse, and collegiate lacrosse, and it is hardcore. It is hardcore. But it has pros and cons to it all. And to go back to the your funny kind of like comment on math having poor PR and branding. It's like, it's so true. And I think like the, folks, whatever field that you're in, I think it behooves anyone in the field to try and make the topic cool. As much as that sounds like, I don't know, woo woo, soft, like making something appear cool will really just bring more people in to push the field forward. Like, and I think that's like important because like if you just neglect that, people are going to go study other things. Like, and your talent pipeline is not going to be as great, right? Now, you know, AI ML is very cool. So math is now cool. Like stats is now cool, right?
Yep.
And that just like will inspire future generations of people to study it, right? So it's like the more a field can do that, the better you're setting your future generation, or at least the future generations of your field up for progress. Um, and one thing about, I if I when I was looking or thinking back on like what would I have studied if I didn't, study, biochemistry basically, I probably would have studied stats. That was like the first time. It kind of was a bummed me out that like stats wasn't really taught much in my kind of like pre-university. Stats wasn't really taught. I didn't find out stats was fun until I got just like university, and I was like, this bums me out. Like this would have been cool if I knew this earlier, because I used to hate math until I got to stats, and I was like, oh, this is cool and fun. But then I was like, it's a little bit too late. I'm already I'm so deep in biochemistry now that like I can't reverse this. But like if I had an opportunity to, I probably would have gone into stats. Um, and on your kind of academic and athletic journey, like I guess when competing at such a high level, did you do it for all your collegiate, like all of the university?
Yeah.
How was that experience? Like it must have been like I like unfortunately could not balance the two. So I ended up stopping collegiate sports around like sophomore year, and I was like, I need to hit the books. Like, how did you balance the two? And like what was that like call the collegiate experience, like sports experience for you?
Yeah, it was wild
Yeah,
because
yeah, yeah,
I
yeah.
look back now, I'm like, oh my God, I'm like
Yeah.
thankful that I had that discipline
Yeah.
like instilled in me, but
Yeah.
it's crazy to think of like trying to learn that discipline now.
Yeah.
Almost feels like impossible. I think okay, I had a couple of things working for me. Um, in addition to obviously my family pushing me to just like always like push, how do you be better, like how do you learn more, and so that obviously filled up my day like as a kid or when I was younger. The other thing I really like drilled it into me was that swimming was very demanding from a schedule standpoint right away. So I when I started, which would have been like 9 years old, like it starts at like a few practices a week, and then already by the time I was 12, 13, 12, I was doing 9 workouts a week.
Oh my
Um,
God.
and then yeah,
Wow.
so it's like and it's very night and day compared to like 12 is the age I stopped all my other sports that I was doing. The one that had survived the up until that point together with swimming was soccer. But soccer at that point was like one practice and one game a week, to
Very
put it
different.
in like
Yeah.
very different. And so I
Yeah.
actually imagine that like a lot of sports, swimming's not the only sport, but I would say that like probably a lot of sports don't, or programs within a sport don't demand that level that early on.
No.
And so because I had
Well, just for
shown like,
comparison for
yeah,
mine,
yeah, yeah,
at
yeah.
9 to 12, we were probably for the cross, we're probably doing maximum 5, max. And then a game on a weekend. So I guess
Right.
6, but that would be max. And like we probably up till like for the early years, we're maxing out at 3 a week. So 9, it's like a multiple of 3. So anyways, just for comparison.
Yeah, 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 yeah. I think that was partly just the nature of the sport, and also partly the program I was in was a high performance program that where the coach was known for producing like young phenoms and developing them. And so to me, that was just the foundational aspect of learning discipline, because that meant that for all of middle school and all of high school, my schedule roughly would have been get up at 4:30, train for 2 hours, go to school, have a school day, come back, train for 2 to 3 more hours, get home, eat dinner. So it's like 7 p.m. now, do your schoolwork, and then like what if there are any other chores? My family actually were pretty good at like shielding me from chores during the week. On the weekend, I didn't have to help with stuff, and now as a kid, I remember dreading. It's like
Yeah.
coming home Saturday morning from Saturdays were like 3.5 hours, and then being like, all right, it's nice out. Like we're gonna do some yard work. I'm like, oh
Yeah,
my
yeah.
God.
No, please. No, not this.
But yeah, so that schedule I got used to it. So I think when I got to university, probably the biggest difference at that point is like autonomy, because I also was in a different city, but that discipline had already been instilled in me. So
Yeah,
and like the desire to like do good things with my energy.
yeah,
And so I just held on to that schedule. I did have to make one change, and that's more specific to the sciences, which you'll know having done it, which is that when you study science in university, you don't only have the lectures, but you have often the same amount of hours in lab and then plus a tutorial. So actually taking, I think whatever 5 courses would have been a full course load. Actually taking 5 courses is probably 8 to 9 courses worth.
yeah,
And so I did take one course off and basically
yeah.
do my undergrad over an extra year, because I tried it for the first 2 weeks and I was like, this is
You're like,
stupid. Like,
this is not happening. This is actually physically impossible.
yeah.
I feel the exact same way. I like the first couple. That was when for me, like I'm thoroughly impressed that you're able to actually balance the collegiate sport while doing science plus lab. Because for me, what had to give was like I had to just give up sports, which was such a major part of my life growing up that it like really like I had like this existential. It's kind of that thing where you're just like, whoa, like this is a part of your identity that you're shedding. And it was kind of this weird, like I could still remember that feeling where I was like, oh, this is going to zero. I was like, this is weird. But eventually I kind of like brought that. I know exactly what you're kind of describing, that discipline and that kind of like athletic rigor. What I did was just like I just brought it to hitting the books and going to lab. I was like,
Yeah.
I'm gonna be I was super competitive in athletics. It's time to just really hit like science really hard. Like the way, like kind of just like wake up, do the thing, and then it's like, it's kind of, what it is. It's like you have to practice. It's kind of like that practicing mindset where it's like, I'm going to practice and hone this craft. And I've always like thought about how much like and that even applies to like entrepreneurship. And like if you can like if you get that discipline that you carry with you, it just like it works everywhere. Like it works everywhere with most things. Um, well, I guess the one thing you kind of go all the way back about you're talking about like traveling and just hard to turn it off. That is the double-edged sword. It's hard to turn it off. And
Mm.
sometimes my wife is like, you need to turn it off. And I'm like, I'm trying to turn it off, but it's really, really hard. This is like deep-seated, like just like ingrained into my DNA. And like if we like to go to Hawaii for vacation. And I'm like on the beach. She's like, don't look like you're relaxing. You know what I mean? I'm like sitting in paradise. I don't have a device, but she's like, you're thinking about something that is stressing you out right now. Can you just like somehow not think about that? I'm trying. I'm trying to relax. I'm trying to relax right now. Um, but you mentioned that you had a lab experience, undergraduate lab experience. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah. Yeah. So I within neuro, a lot of the courses were like typical science courses, which meant that there was a component where you had to just like go in lab and like learn how to do certain techniques. And one thing that I really thought was uh very cool for neuro specifically was that they made us recreate a bunch of the like foundational neuro findings with the tools that people would have had back then. So like patch clamping and like looking at like frog eggs and basically like under microscope trying to get like a needle to like
Yeah.
just be touching without bursting
Yeah.
the outside, and then you have to like give the contraption like a flick of the right intensity so it like penetrates the membrane but doesn't like blow up the whole thing, so that then you can put current through it and like measure like, which I thought was like super fascinating because first of all it's always mind-blowing to me of like the stuff that we discovered when we had like such rudimentary tools, but then it also gives you an appreciation for like what's complex about the science and why the advances in the technology that underpin the science are so important, because it's not just that like, oh, we're developing better theories. It's like we also have like tools that let you do so much more, which then let you cognitively offload a lot of things so that you can focus more on. It's actually like a big premise of like Kaleidoscope,
Yep.
and sure we'll touch on that. But um, so there was a lot of that, which I thought was like really cool. I remember the one aspect of it that I dreaded was when we did like neuroanatomy, and it's like the classic me. I've seen memes on this. It's like the anatomy textbook you're studying versus the test itself. The textbook's like perfectly multicolored and
Yeah.
labeled, and then you go into the lab and it's brain slices and
Yeah.
everything's the same, like
Yes.
pale white, and it's just there's a pin in something. It's like, what is this? And
Yeah.
then you're trying to guess like what is the pin in? Like I have
Yeah.
no idea. This brain looks atypical.
Yeah. I know
Like
the exact meme. Yes. Yeah. I know the
yeah.
exact. That is hilarious.
Yeah. Um, but yeah, so there's a big lab component. And I did have to still do quite a bit of work, which ended up being a big blessing, I think, in the end, to make the program work with my swimming schedule. And the forcing function for me was in first year neuro. Um, we part of the curriculum is what was it, like a 2 month, 2 month or something. I forget exactly what. 2 months, basically retreat where you live in like near Banff in Canada and like the Rocky Mountains, and there was like a big research center there, and you would do like a spring course, entirely focused on like lab methods, and it was
That's dope. That's
a really
super
cool,
dope.
a really cool thing. I couldn't do it because the months it is, which is which is like May and June, like all the peak competitions in swimming are
Oh
In
man.
July and August, and the
Yeah.
qualifying events are in June. So I was like, well, there's no way that I can take l- like more than, like, to put into perspective, like the most I was taking off consecutively in a given calendar year would have been like a week and a half to two. Um, so there was no way I was gonna do that. So that it was like a big hurdle initially, and so thankfully the department itself was like very understanding, because as soon as they realized that I wasn't just like someone trying to get out of doing thing because I wanted to travel, and like I had like a legitimate reason,
Yeah.
they helped me make it up. And so the idea
Cool.
was, okay, you're gonna have two components that you're missing by not going to this. There's all the theory behind all the things we're going to learn, and then there's the practical experience. And so let's figure out how to break that apart. And actually the prof who taught the theoretical part agreed to just for me to come in like in evenings a couple of times a week over a semester, and he would just one-on-one teach me this stuff. And
Nice.
and he's like this like very intimidating a Dutch guy, and so that was
Yeah.
like, as a first year undergrad, I remember like very intimidating to have
Yeah.
like a one-on-one problem and then ask you like, so wait, why do you think this is the answer? And like I'd
And
only
you're
ever had
like,
like
oh
my
my
parents do
God.
that to me before.
I'm freak out. I know the
So
intensity. Yeah.
it was a
That's
lot,
amazing.
but it was a really good push. And then and I'm very thankful that he was like willing to just do that for me. And then similarly on the research side, I got really lucky because I worked with Ken Lukowiak, who agreed to basically take me on and teach me like how do you do scientific research like properly, and not just teach me, but so I ended up basically working on different research projects from first year undergrad all throughout like 5 years with him, and ended up publishing like three first author papers because his mindset was like he doesn't need to be first author because he's like proven himself. And why do those badges matter anymore? He has like funding in a good lab and like interesting research. He knows that for like a young scientist, that's like a really valuable learning experience. And so, and the culture I guess he had cultivated there was one where the postdocs that were working on this didn't also feel the pressure to like get as many first authorships as possible. Like they had their own work that they were working on, and they would need to help me occasionally and like teach me stuff, but they wanted to empower me and like put me in the driver's seat. So that was like a very rare,
I'm gonna say
like,
straight up, I'm like jaw drop. That's fucking awesome.
yeah.
Like
I
really.
for the record, I did not have a first authorship paper coming out of grad school. Like, and, like, there's different reasons behind that, but like I didn't. So to me, like that whole, like I don't think at the time I realized like how crazy cool and like rare that was. But now looking back, I was like, damn, that was special.
That's so sweet because I think, it kind of reminds, on the same wavelength as like, you got to think about the future generation of the field. Much like if you care about math, you should probably try and make math cool so people want to study math. If we don't make math cool, no one wants to study it, and then we just forget, right? And this is exactly kind of a real practical application, or this has less to do with coolness, but it's more about empowering the future generation. Because if you don't, then what's left? And it's kind of the similar. I think about this in business too, where it's like, I know everyone wants to fund serial entrepreneurs. I know everybody wants to fund a person who's like, done. This is their 10th rodeo. I get it. It's de-risked. The bet's easier. It's not a hard concept. But if you don't fund first-time founders, you will not have serial entrepreneurs. Like they will be an extinct thing, right? Because every serial entrepreneur was once a first-time founder, right? And it's kind of like this. It's like, if you want, and I love that the prof was like, hell yeah, go for it. Like, this is an opportunity for you to grow into this and like really start to, be out the driver's seat, and even all the way down through like the PhDs and postdocs. Right? Yeah, I got these projects, but this one can be yours. I think is an awesome thing. It's a kind of a pay it forward kind of mentality because you care about the greater, like the sum of the parts rather than just like me. I need to stack more first authorships. And, maybe I'm getting too philosophical with it, but I think it's like important. And you kind of see it like when you think about entrepreneurial areas all over the world, and you're trying to like, why does this area have such a thriving entrepreneurial ecosystem? I'd always think about the willingness to give back to the future, pay it forward, like to the future generation. And if you don't do that, that's like the ecosystem doesn't really work. And I think, at least having grown up in the Bay Area, I'm just like, I realize now how lucky like this kind of cultural mindset is, because it's not everywhere. Much like how in your as you mentioned, like going to your grad school, very different like experience, I'm going to imagine. But that's kind of something that really stood out to me.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I have the same kind of I think I reached the same conclusions when I was trying to reflect on what was, for example, underpinning Toronto not having taken off as like an entrepreneurial hub to the potential that I think it has, especially given like again this enrichment of like people who've had to grind or whose families have had to grind, like diversity of experience and thought, like great institutions, like great science, great city itself. And I think a big thing is like, yeah, you need some kind of critical mass of people who ended up successful and who are like happy to pay things forward with basically no strings attached, or like on their own dime or give their own time, and to do that consistently. And then you get to a point where I think you get these like thriving ecosystems. But yeah, we're digressing now.
That's for real.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the Biotech Startups podcast with Bogdan Knezevic. In part 2, we'll dive into Bogdan's experience as an undergrad in Canada. his decision to pursue neuroscience, and what it was like juggling elite-level athletics with lab research and publishing. He also shares the story behind his Rhodes Scholarship, why he chose Oxford, and how a childhood love of Lord of the Rings unexpectedly helped shape his path. If you're enjoying the episode, follow the show, leave us a review, and share it with a friend. See you next time. The Biotech Startups podcast is produced by Exceeder. Don't want to miss an episode? Search for the Biotech Startups podcast wherever you get your podcasts and click subscribe. Exceeder provides research labs with equipment leases on founder-friendly terms to support paths to exceptional outcomes. To learn more, visit our website www.exceeder.com. On behalf of the team here at Exceeder, thanks for listening. The Biotech Startups podcast provides general insights into the life science sector through the experiences of its guests. The use of information on this podcast or materials linked from the podcast is at the user's own risk. The views expressed by the participants are their own and are not the views of Exceeder or sponsors. No reference to any product, service, or company in the podcast is an endorsement by Exceeder or its guests.